Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co., and these are the top 10 games that I am most heavily cooled on. These are games that I really liked when I first played them, and my opinion was over here, and then in some substantive way, my opinion has gone down on them, which happens all the time. I've covered a lot of games, both, well, obviously the past 5 years of doing YouTube over here, but even before that, I played games. I played a ton of games, and then sometimes things go up, sometimes things go down, most often things stay the same, and sometimes games really excite you, but then over time, they kind of really cool down too. These are my top 10 in that category. I tried going through, I may have missed some, it's possible, but I tried going through a combination of recollection in general, as well as looking over my ratings over time, as well as, what's left my collection. 9 of these have left my collection. 1 I'm still going through, but I think will eventually leave. But these are games that I really loved when they first came out, and then time, grind, issues that didn't come up in the first few plays, all of these things slowly combined to make these games that I like less than when I first got those games. I'm going to start with number 10 on this list, and number 10 is Super Fantasy Brawl. Super Fantasy Brawl is one that, from Mythic Games originally, I believe Simon has taken over the title, but I really loved it when it first came out. It was quick skirmish gameplay, easy to dive into, super amazing miniatures, great art, and just an easy game to play with combinations of miniatures and figures and abilities and heroes that all gave you just a fast-paced arena combat game. And I loved it. It was great. It was amazing, and the production didn't hurt. The quick gameplay was quick, and it was fun. And over time, I went from here down to here. It's good. I still think Super Fantasy Brawl is a good time, but there are a few things that held it back for me. Firstly is, over time, the heroes didn't have a strong distinguishing sense of wanting to play one hero versus another. Now, don't get me wrong, the heroes do have their own flavor, and if you play the game a lot, I'm sure you have specific combinations that all work well together, but I think the same thing that made the game so accessible and simple to dive into also held it back a little bit from standing out over enough time and repeated plays. It's one that I still would happily play. In fact, most of these, by the way, these are all good games. They're all games that I think are still worth trying, but they definitely went down a big chunk from how much I liked them originally. I think enough plays and the realizing that getting more heroes wasn't making the game better for me in any way. It wasn't really that I even felt the difference past the cool sculpt and the new art. And again, some small distinction in how they feel. But having a shuffled together deck of various cards and then trying to figure out the sense or feel of it, I still think Super Fantasy Brawl is an accessible arena combat skirmish game, but one that I definitely went down a bit on. Coming in at number 9, we have Tanares Adventures. Tanares Adventures, originally Arena the Contest. This is the one game that I still have left in my collection from these. Arena the Contest, and then Tanares Adventures. One of the first reviews I ever did on the channel, and it was such a good time. I had so much fun playing through Arena the Contest. But it's one of several that are on this list that eventually playing the game enough and grinding through it did produce some degree of lessening to the experience. Now, Arena, to be fair, is higher on this list in the sense that it's less effective than others we'll get to soon, but Arena the Contest went from incredible gameplay that there's a skirmish head-to-head mode, fighting 4 heroes versus 4 heroes, but there's also more substantively, there's a solo mode that the original game had, and then a campaign that developed from that really allows you to take control of a bunch of characters, fighting in a almost very D&D inspired, like a very RPG-inspired gameplay, but leaning more into a dungeon crawl with actual rules and elements going on. Well, not to say D&D doesn't have rules, but more structured like a board game is, and it gave me one of the better experiences I've ever had until I then played it again and again and again, and over 100 hours into it, eventually that same thing that makes the game great, which is, the game has so much nuance and depth to it, and so much strategy as you play things out, and because I'm setting up for a 3-hour session every single time I play, often 3 to 4 hours, it just becomes one of those games that gives me an excellent experience, but one that I really have to set aside an afternoon for, and while the individual missions are strongly varied and do give you different challenges and different things to strive for as you play, over enough time, it was one of those things where the chore of setting it up, the chore of getting into it, was getting more and more outpaced. I guess they'd say the excellent gameplay over time was being outpaced by the chore that it was to dive into that gameplay. The gameplay was here, static the whole time, and the chore just slowly crept up on it. So, Tanares Adventures, Arena the Contest, Still a great game, but one of those games that there's so much content for it, and you definitely do not need all of that content. I think most people, not necessarily everyone, most people will be burnt out on what that game is offering far before they're able to enjoy all of it. I'm not saying don't get it. I think it's a worthwhile experience. I'm saying you don't need to get all of it. Coming in at number 8, we have Hoplomachus Victorum. This is a game that I tried at, I want to say Gen Con 2023, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken. But Hoplomachus Victorum, I played, I got a little demo session, and I loved it. It gave me the strategy of like games like Too Many Bones, but so much more accessible as far as diving into it. And I loved the experience, and I brought it home eventually. I didn't bring it home eventually. It was a demo at first. I got it eventually. I played through it, and it was a ton of fun. But that was kind of the first play. The main problem with Hoplomachus Victorum is that it's roughly like 40 sessions or something like that, 40 small little sessions before you get to the conclusion of it. And the boss fights, the Scion fights are drastically different, but there's so little impact on the whole experience. And so it's a lot of grind to get to a point where you eventually take down the Scion and you want to play through it again to try a different combination, but you have that same grindiness. It's one of those experiences where your first playthrough is likely, if you like Chip Theory's games, is likely going to be an excellent experience. But as you go through it again and again, you're going through a lot of the same in order to get to that small differences, which kind of took away from the experience for me. Now, they did have an expansion for it. Hoplomachus Victorum was part of a set of, I believe, Hoplomachus Pandora's Box or something like that. They had a whole expansion campaign for it with a variety of expansions, one of which was a code name Hoplomachus Victorum, which is a faster way to go through the experience, and that does improve upon it. But overall, my initial high in Hoplomachus Victorum did wear down as I got a sense of grind over the similarities of diving into any individual arena combat. Again, expansions are meant to address this to some degree, but by that point, I had already had my opinion lowered a decent amount. From there, and again, I say decent amount, but all of these are games I still recommend, just with caveats and with less of the hype that I originally had in my original coverage that then over time, reared its head. From there, we have number 7, which is Hadrians Wall. Now, I still play Hadrians Wall. At this point, I play it primarily on Board Game Arena, but it's one of those games that I dive into infrequently, but I still enjoy what Hadrians Wall does, because, like I said already, all of these are great games. But Hadrians Wall, I loved it when it first came out. I thought it was one of the best roll-and-write games I've ever played, and it had that mantle for a bit, until eventually I realized that every time I played Hadrians Wall, I was going through the same core stuff for 60% of the game, and then the game shifted in where I chose to put my extra, which pathways from the pathways the game offers. It's a very intricate roll and write. Which pathways would I choose to explore this game? But I'm still going to do those same 60 to 70% of the things that I do every single time. I'm still going to go ahead and get those wall guards. I'm still going to go ahead and build up my brick manufacturing. All these things you're doing in the game that fall into very specific patterns, and you're teasing and exploring the game by trying to figure out what small areas can you contribute more to or combine your contributions to in order to maximize your score. And while that still produces an incredibly tactical experience, it lost some of its shine as I realized that so much of my time in Hadrian's Wall was doing the same exact thing I did last game and the game before that and the game before that. It didn't give me enough room to branch out and really feel like I was fully exploring something new and interesting. It was a lot of repetition and a little bit of exploration as you go. A great game. Too many plays took away from the experience for me. Number 6 is Dead Reckoning. Dead Reckoning is great. I mean, so many of these games are great in their own different ways. Dead Reckoning, when I first played the prototype way back when, I was so hyped as far as how good of an experience it had. And then when it delivered, I dove into it a bunch and still had a great time with how good of an experience it was. But it is a little long for what the experience is. And there's a lot of this card sleeving, basically crafting cards as you go. It's John D. Clare. He loves doing card crafting systems in different ways. Highly recommend checking out Runes, a new trick-taking game from him. Either way, but he has this card crafting system that I found that the overall arc of what I did in the game, it felt a little longer than the experience I was getting out of it after I had explored the game, 5, 10 times or whatever it was. It wasn't one of those games where across the first few plays, there's a lot of exploration going on in terms of how to interact with the game that made it so that playing a 3-hour session didn't feel too long. But over time, I realized that I only really like playing the game at 2 players because 3 players just really bogged down how long the game was. And at 2 players, it really felt more like I was doing my own kind of sandboxy adventure. It's still great, but I think for me, Xia Legend of a Drift System is the game that gives me that sandboxy adventure in a way that feels the most worth diving into, versus Dead Reckoning felt like it was a little too long for what it was. There's some other small complaints I had around it. There's a little more nuance to get into. Specific limitations on things where you build a certain direction, but then couldn't go too small nuance. Either way, Dead Reckoning, great game, but my initial high was definitely much higher than it over time. At number 5, we have 7th Continent and or 7th Citadel. 7th Continent was one of the most innovative game systems I played when I played it. No game was really offering that kind of exploration, a kind of exploration that several games since then have specifically tried to mimic because it was so well done at what it did. Whether it's Tainted Grail, whether it's Aeon's Trespass, there were different games that kind of built upon what 7th Continent delivered, including, of course, 7th Citadel as well. And 7th Continent is still a great game. I'm saying great way too many times in this video, but it's true. It's still a great system. But it's one that there's a lot of grind to that system as well. Once the allure of the system wears off, as all games will have that shine wear off over time. And once that shine wears off, once the coolness of something new starts to move away, the question then becomes what things get in the way of the experience, and are you willing to persevere past those? In the case of 7th Continent, there's a lot of card setting up as you go through it, a lot of finding the right card. You go to a new tile, you find the card, you go through the filing cabinet effectively, you put it down. When you're done putting it away, you have to go ahead and put every single card back into a spot from 700 cards or whatever it is. There's a ton of cards, and the more cards you get, the more work there is in order to try to put everything in its right place. A lot of time is spent exploring the world, which is a ton of fun, but a lot of time is spent maintaining what you're doing and finding cards and putting cards back, and that really takes me away from the experience. 7th Continent is one of those games that I would latch onto in a heartbeat if they put out a digital version of that, as much as the fact that I generally prefer tabletop over digital when I'm playing a game. 7th Continent is one of those games where I think I'd prefer a digital version where I got everything good about the system, and it's such an excellent system, but I did so without the filing cabinet aspect of it that gets in the way of my enjoyment. At number 4, we have Roleplay Adventures. Roleplay Adventures started off strong and then got stronger and then got to a point where I was ready to possibly not even bother finishing the campaign because it just got a little too grindy for what it is. The first adventure in Roleplay Adventures it teases you. It kind of gives you a sense of this choose your own adventure, which is really, really well done. But then the second adventure onwards only gets better as you start to get items and craft your dice and engage in these various encounters and roll your dice and use your tools to adjust your dice and swap with the colors. There's both a story going on, a choose your own adventure story that is highly compelling, but there's also at the same time a bit of a mechanism of the dice crafting and the dice manipulation. That puzzle becomes very rewarding as you play. The problem is that only lasts so long. The adventure keeps going on, and the story is great the whole way through. Well, great relative, but it's a very good story the whole way through. But the mechanics of the game got tedious and also too easy. It got to a point where I knew that every single encounter I had was going to end with us being successful, but I still had to go through the motions because what if? Who knows what's going to happen? But it kind of was tedious as I went through it. It didn't scale well as you went. Now again, they do have an expansion, a Gloomhaven Adventure, that to some extent I believe tried addressing these things. I don't know how well. I never played through it. Well, I played through the prototype, never fully played through Gloomhaven Adventure, Gloomhaven's Secrets. But overall, Roleplay Adventures I still believe is a game worth exploring, but for me it's one that there was a degree of grind to the experience over enough plays where I felt less challenged by the experience, and the mechanics of what I was doing were way too similar and not really evolving, but I still had to go through those motions every single time. And so it's one that my initial thoughts were here, it quickly rose to here, and then over time it shifted down to just a very good game. Coming in at number 3, we have Akropolis. Akropolis is the most recent one of these two, I think, leave my collection, although again, Tanares Adventures is technically still here. But Akropolis is one that I actually played it at the same time as Hoplomachus Victorum, at the same convention, Gen Con 2023, I think, and I thought it was incredible. I just had a chance to demo it just at a random table, nothing set up, it was just there. I played it, I loved it, I played it again, I loved it, and then I got it and continued to play it again and again and again, and I thought it was great. It is and was one of the better score optimization games where you just feel like you can get a ton of things. You feel incredibly rewarded as you build out these bigger and bigger chains. Playing at 2 players is so much fun because you can choose all the tiles and play as if you're playing 4 players, but at 2 players, you play with all the abilities and you get these like 600 points in the game, and it's so much fun. But I said in my initial review that there wasn't a lot of variability to the experience. The game was kind of the same thing every single time you played, and I wondered how that would fare over time. Fast forward 2 years and another 20-30 plays of it, and it's still one that I enjoy, but it's one that I find myself where initially it was my go-to. For a long time it was my go-to, let's play a quick game where you score a lot of points doing fun things. over time, it shifted to me going back to Calico, back to Cascadia, back to other games that did the same thing, but with more variability to the way I felt as I played it, and or the even setup or the criteria or the scoring. Akropolis is and was great, but definitely shifted down over time because of that lack of variability. Coming in number 2 is one that many of you, if you watch the channel, are probably expecting this one, but that's Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven does get down to number... Gloomhaven is a game that I have spent hundreds of hours in between Gloomhaven, between Frosthaven, and between Jaws of the Lion. And do take that into account because I've played it physically, I've played it digitally, I've also played Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs, but I've spent hundreds of hours in the world of Gloomhaven and Frosthaven, and that should be taken into account when you're thinking of, okay, great, well, yes, it went down, but only after hundreds and hundreds of hours. Same thing for Tanares Adventures, same thing for Seventh Citadel. There are games where if you spent enough time in them and they go down, then the question is, do they deliver or not? And for Gloomhaven, it gave me hundreds of hours of fun. But it also gave me different issues, depending on whether I was playing it physically or digitally. There were different issues at play. Physically has a ton of setup and maintenance that does get in the way of the experience for me. Digitally has kind of those moments when you, like, there's moments, I don't know about you, but there's moments in a solo or cooperative game where I'm like, you know what? We're just going to power through this and tip that die. Not that Gloomhaven really has dice, but we're going to tip that die, change that card drawn because we just want to have fun and we're stuck on this situation. Digitally doesn't have that as well. You could change the difficulty scaling, but that makes the actual scenario you're playing less satisfying as opposed to just having that one moment where you're like, we're just going to go ahead and draw it again because it's just not working well. Overall, Gloomhaven Digital has issues, Gloomhaven Physical has issues. Both of them ultimately produce an experience that is incredible. It was the number one game on Board Game Geek for a long time for a reason. It has seen incredible success because of what it has done in the board game industry and because of how well it has been received by so many players. And I don't want to undersell how much fun I've gotten out of Gloomhaven. But it's also one that went from, at one point, my number 3 game of all time, in the year that I was like diving into it, 100 hours plus into it, I was like, it's my number 3 game of all time. And then it became from there a game that I am reluctant to pull out and play again, both because the physical and the digital both have different issues, and I think I've gotten enough Gloomhaven that I'm happy with the experience I've had, and I don't need to keep going. Then my number 1 is probably the game that I feel most, I guess, regret over the initial score I gave it. And again, it's still great, but this is Destinies from Lucky Duck. Destinies is a lot of fun, but when I first played it, the experience I had was so satisfying as far as the story, the adventure, the journey of it, that I think I got a little bit more pulled into how much fun I was having and a little less critical of the overall experience. Additionally, it was one of the first narrative games that I really got pulled more into, and that certainly biased me more towards enjoying it. But then over time, as I played other narrative games that didn't have some of the issues Destinies did, I realized that I just need to play more games that deliver a good narrative experience that pulls you in. When I first played through Destinies, it was something incredibly satisfying about having my character, but going on these arcs, I'm kind of racing the other characters on this semi-app-driven adventure, and the experience I had was a 5 out of 5. And so I gave it a 5 out of 5. The experience I had was definitely a 5 out of 5. I still remember how much I enjoyed it, how excited I was to continue to dive back into it. But the more I played it, the more I realized that there were a lot of issues, and it is an app-driven game, which does hold back from the experience for me. There's the aspect that you really don't have any strong sense of your ability to control how well you're going to do. Yes, you can make good choices, but it's mostly the game playing you as you just go ahead and talk to various characters and interact with various things. And sure, there's fun. There is a sense of choose your own adventure, but it's not a game where you really feel like you earned the win, or when you lose that you earned the loss. And so an initial high over the experience that it gave me was very much present, but the more I played it, the more the issues started to rear their heads, and it went from a game that I loved to a game that I had fun playing. Destinies to me is easily the one that I feel the most drop-off from my initial plays and my initial experience to the subsequent experiences that I had after, 5, 10, 15 plays. It's one of those games that I still think it's worth checking out. I've had a lot of fun with it, but I think you have to know more about the experience you're signing up for. And for me, the story that it provided, the immersion that it provided, is something that I did find from other games over time, but ones that didn't require an app and had a greater sense of deterministic gameplay as opposed to the kind of the game playing you that Destinies felt like it had. And those are the 10 games that, for me, I feel fell the most from my initial high. Games that I had a ton of excitement for at first. All of these games were either 5 out of 5s or 4.5 out of 5s, and they've all dropped down. They're all pretty solid. I think the lowest I'd give these now is still a 4. They all deliver a great gameplay experience. But I think when you have a game that delivers so high, if it does go down a bit, there's something almost a sense of loss over the initial experience you've had and where they ended up. But in any case, these are my 10. Let me know in the comments down below, what games did you really love at first, and then they fell for you later and became something that it just wasn't the initial experiences that you had. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.